Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Rose. I'm Dean here at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Welcome. We are delighted to have you here and to have you for this important conference. I'm really grateful, especially to see a former colleague here, and I have a couple former colleagues here, I have a former student here. I'm very proud to see her up here, both participating in a panel and moderating a panel today. This conference is sponsored by the Reproductive Rights Law Institute. It's also part of the Law Medicine Center at Case Western Reserve University that we're very proud of. The conference is also co-sponsored by the Social Justice Law Center. So the intersection of disability rights with justice and reproductive rights and justice is an area that really has received insufficient attention from scholars, as well as advocates, lawyers, and healthcare providers. But as the panel topics demonstrate, there are really a number of ways in which disability connects with reproductive health, from the particular burdens on access to reproductive health care faced by those with disabilities to issues around consent and competency. So this conference really furthers our mission here at Case Western of promoting cutting-edge legal scholarship and advocacy, and builds on our nationally recognized strengths in healthcare, law, and social justice. For these reasons, I'm really delighted that we're hosting this great event today, which has received generous support from RRLI's funders. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn things over to Jesse Hill. Jesse is the Ben C. Green Professor of Law and founding director of the Reproductive Rights Law Initiative at the School of Law.
Thank you, Dean Rose. So as Dean Rose said, my name is Jesse Hill. I'm the director of the Reproductive Rights Law Initiative, as well as a professor here at the law school. And I also am delighted to welcome you here today, both the folks who made it here early this morning in person, and those who are attending online. The mission of the Reproductive Rights Law Initiative is to preserve and advance the legal right of all Ohioans to make their own reproductive decisions. We advance this mission through advocacy, including litigation, scholarship, and education. And this conference brings together all these aspects of our mission. As Dean Rose just said, the intersection of disability justice and reproductive justice is an incredibly important topic that is vastly understudied and under-researched. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today, and for that, I want to thank the law school for its support, the Law Medicine Center, of which the Reproductive Rights Law Initiative is a part, as well as our co-sponsor, the Social Justice Law Center, and RRLI's generous funders. But also, I definitely want to call out and thank Maggie Scottese, who was really both the sort of brains and the brawn behind this conference. She has conceived and executed every aspect of this. This was really her brainchild, her baby. She has put in countless hours pulling this together, while also, doing her job as a busy attorney with the RLI. So really, really incredible work. I know there are other folks also who've done amazing work. I think Maggie's going to tell you more about that to put this together, but I just wanted to call out Maggie especially and to say I'm so thrilled with the results that we have here today, and I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say. So please join me in welcoming Maggie to kick off.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and thank you so much, Dean Rose, for introing us as well. Good morning. My name is Maggie Scottese. I am a staff attorney here at Case Western Reserve Law School at the not the Disability Rights Law Center, the Reproductive Rights Law Initiative. I'm also a former protection advocacy attorney, which means I did disability rights, civil rights enforcement for a couple of years, and a former abortion fund worker, and I'm a disabled woman. This conference was sorry, I'm gonna cry, I'm gonna be really honest. This conference was a labor of love for all of us here at RLI. This team took a nugget of an idea from a very frustrated disabled woman who didn't feel seen in either the disability spaces or the reproductive rights spaces she inhabits, and turned it into an event bringing together advocates and scholars from across the country to have conversations about what true access looks like for reproductive health and sexuality for disabled folks. As anyone with a disability or working in disability spaces knows, creating accessible experiences is not something that just happens. This event has been an incredible, if frustrating, learning experience for our team to discover just how hard it is, logistically and financially, to ensure accessibility, even at the most basic levels. A common refrain on our team check-ins during this last year was, "This is exactly why we need this conference, because it shouldn't be this hard." I'm deeply grateful for the support of our incredible director, Dean Jesse Hill, our incomparable administrative assistant, Alita. I don't think she's in the room right now. Alita is the person who held us all together and made sure everything happened. It would not have happened without her. And for those of you who don't know, she started with us 3 months ago. And she jumped right in and has handled literally I also want to thank my incredible co-staff attorney, our in-house graphic designer, and our photographer for the day, Becca Kendis. And I also want to thank our fabulous legal fellow, Katie Corin, for jumping into this project as a new hire as well and making it your own. I'm so proud of you for what you've done with this conference. Thank you so much for our incredible panelists. These are folks who have mentored me, who are my family, who have taught me over the years, and I'm so excited to have you all here to share your experiences and your expertise with us. And of course, thank you to the law school and Dean Rose for not only supporting the incredible work of the RRLI, but also this conference in particular. So I'm really excited for us to get started with our first panel. Our first moderator is Katie Corwin, and Katie is the legal fellow here at Case Western Reserve University Rights Law Initiative. She graduated from CUNY School of Law in 2024, and while in law school, she did extensive reproductive justice work. Katie interned with the Center for Reproductive Rights and the National Abortion Federation. Hand over to Katie now.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Maggie. People hear me? Okay. Too short. Okay. So this panel is focusing on the aftermath of Dobbs and unmet needs in an access crisis. So as we all know, the Dobbs decision put abortion in a crisis for everyone that needs access, but it had a particular effect on disabled people. So this is just going to provide like grounding with the American Disabilities Act and just set the stage for how siloing of reproductive and sexual health has silenced and negatively impacted disabled Americans. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and then they will kick it off. First, we have Shakir. She is a results-driven professional with extensive expertise in law, policy development, and program management. Throughout her career, she has designed and implemented innovative solutions to enhance organizational efficiency, resolve systemic inequalities, and deliver measurable impact. Her expertise spans legal analysis, civil rights investigations, team leadership, and targeted communications. Amanda Spriggs-Reed is currently an Equal Justice Works Fellow with Women Enabled International. Amanda's EJW project at WEI advocates for abortion access for disabled people through amicus briefs in impact litigation, technical guidance on disability justice for abortion care professionals, and technical guidance on disability justice for abortion care professionals. Her project work so far has included filing 2 United States Supreme Court amicus briefs and launching a national survey on disability and abortion access. And finally, we have Colleen Damrell. She is a proud Clevelander, abortion access worker and advocate for labor rights. She is a member assistance program manager at Ohio Women's Alliance, a statewide reproductive justice organization. MAP is a practical support program serving dozens of abortion seekers per month, providing assistance for travel, lodging, childcare, and more, with the support of a network of 75+ volunteers in Ohio and neighboring states. So now we're going to turn it over to Amanda, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Amanda Spriggs Reed, as Katie already introduced. As a visual description, I am an Asian American woman with long black hair and green highlights, and I am wearing a dark green blazer. I am going to be talking about some of the abortion care barriers for the disability community post-Dobbs. I'm sure that a lot of people in this room are really familiar with these, but wanted to highlight a couple of key areas. Go to the next slide. So, and as an overview of what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to mostly be focusing on the current context that harms of abortion bans have to people with disabilities, including highlighting a couple of stories of disabled people who've been harmed by these bans. Specifically, I think it's very important to highlight real life stories of people with disabilities and think about all of the people whose stories are not being told because they have not had the privilege of being proximate to power. And then I'm going to be talking about seeking and providing accessible abortion care, including highlighting an upcoming publication that WEI and Reproductive are co-publishing called Lessons from the Disability and Abortion Access Survey. We can have the next slide. So starting with the current context, next slide. Since Dobbs, 23 states have either banned or placed hostile restrictions on abortion, and that represents nearly half, 47.7% of disabled women of reproductive age living in the US that are in these states. Many of these states that have banned or significantly restricted abortion access are located in parts of the country where there are significantly higher rates of Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous women, as well as higher rates of poverty. So this results in a disproportionate impact on people with disabilities who hold multiple identities. So to my first point on the ways that abortion bans harm pregnant people with disabilities. Pregnant people with disabilities are at a heightened risk of obstetric emergencies. They're at higher risk for nearly all adverse outcomes during pregnancy, including the ones listed. I especially want to highlight the fact that people with disabilities are 11 times more likely to die during childbirth than non-disabled people. Of course, people with disabilities can have fully safe and happy pregnancies, and this is not meant to imply that pregnancy is not desirable or possible for people with disabilities, but it's important to think about these factors as the context in which people with disabilities are trying to make decisions in a very difficult legal environment. In light of these health risks, it's especially important for people with disabilities to have full range of reproductive choices, including abortion care. Many states carve out exceptions, or at least so-called exceptions, to their abortion bans for the life of the pregnant person. But these exceptions are extremely vague, and most doctors don't know how to clearly navigate them, which results in significant delays in abortion care that's necessary to preserve the health and well-being of pregnant people, including people with disabilities. As a result, patients experiencing obstetric emergencies face substantial delays in receiving the healthcare that they need and lead to serious physical harm and in some instances, even death. One story that I wanted to highlight is Elizabeth Weller, who was part of the Center for Reproductive Rights lawsuit in Texas, Zorowski v. Texas. She is a woman in Texas living with a physical disability. And at 19 weeks into her pregnancy, she experienced PPROM, which is a very serious pregnancy complication. Her OBGYN told her that the fetus was too underdeveloped to survive, and that if she did not terminate her pregnancy, she could get an infection that caused her to lose her uterus or even her life. Yet she was denied this medically necessary abortion because she wasn't sick enough for the law. Elizabeth was sent home and spent the next 3 days having her physical, mental, and emotional health deteriorate. She was vomiting consistently, had abdominal pain, and agonized over the fact that she was losing her wanted pregnancy and was being denied care. When she was readmitted to the hospital 3 days later, she was diagnosed with a serious infection and finally approved for an abortion. Elizabeth described this delay as akin to punishment and noted that the delay in care significantly worsened her healing process. And this is a person who had the opportunity to tell their story in CRR's lawsuit, but I'm sure that there are many more stories of disabled people being denied care that we haven't heard yet. The next area of context that I wanted to highlight is the fact that the legal landscape has deterred people with disabilities to seek life-saving abortion care afterwards because of the threat of criminalization. People with disabilities are much more likely to hold multiple marginalized identities that can brush up against the criminal justice system. And the criminalization of pregnancy care is particularly impacting them. The work that Pregnancy Justice has been doing to highlight pregnancy criminalization, many of their clients experience substance disorders and are members of the disability community. One story I wanted to highlight was reported by ProPublica, and it was Candy Miller, who was a 41-year-old Black mother of 3 from Georgia who had lupus, diabetes, and hypertension. She had been warned by her doctors that another pregnancy could be fatal. So when she unexpectedly became pregnant, Candy ordered abortion pills online to end her pregnancy at home before it caused a life-threatening situation. Georgia's abortion ban meant that she was unable to access in-person abortion care in her home state, despite the health risks that her pregnancy posed. Candy experienced an incomplete abortion and a complication, but fearing the consequences of seeking care because of criminalization through Georgia's abortion ban, she did not seek medical attention. Instead, Candy suffered at home through her pain until her husband found her unresponsive in bed several days later. Really critically, a committee of maternal health experts in Georgia ruled that Candy's death was preventable because of the state's abortion ban, not because of the abortion that she sought. And again, there are probably many more stories of people with disabilities experiencing serious harm because of criminalization. Some of the key barriers that I wanted to highlight, that with abortion being illegal or heavily restricted in nearly half of US states, disabled people have an even heightened barrier to accessing care. For example, socioeconomic barriers. People with disabilities are twice as likely to live below the federal poverty line and 3 times more likely to be unemployed. That means that it is a significant burden to have to pay for their abortion care out of pocket, having to pay for the logistical supports of having to travel for their abortion care, arrange childcare, arrange housing, all of those things make it much more difficult. Logistical barriers. Disabled people are significantly more likely to report experiencing a logistical barrier to accessing any form of reproductive appointment. 50.7% of people with disabilities reported this barrier compared to just 29.7% of people without disabilities. And that can include beyond just transportation or asking time off of work, also things like having privacy to access care from a caregiver or a family member that they might be reliant on to access healthcare, which is particularly important when you're seeking something as sensitive as abortion care. Healthcare systems at a macro level also create huge barriers for people with disabilities. 58% of people with disabilities under the age of 65 rely on federal health insurance like Medicare and Medicaid, compared to just 14% of people under 65 without a disability. And because of the Hyde Amendment, that means that many people with disabilities who are on federal insurance can't have their abortion covered by their health insurance. And for people that are only on Medicare who have a disability, that also creates barriers to even accessing contraception because that is not covered under certain parts of Medicare. And even if people can overcome all of these various barriers to actually get to a clinic appointment, if they've had to travel out of state, if they have to arrange transportation, find the funds to be able to access care, once they get to the clinic, there's still more barriers that they have to overcome. Lack of accessible facilities, accessible medical equipment, and a lack of provider training on how to care for people with disabilities all create barriers to equitable care for people with disabilities. For example, in Texas, healthcare providers found that while they were receiving the same amount of hotline calls from people with disabilities seeking information about how to access abortion care before Texas's bans went into effect, once the bans went into effect, people with disabilities were accessing abortion at much lower rates to try and get information. one provider said, quote, "We're just not seeing them travel over the border, they just represent a group of people that are falling through the cracks." So it's particularly important for reproductive health providers to make a concerted effort to provide services that are accessible to the disability community. Next slide. So to go into some ways that providers can support people seeking abortion care with disabilities and how to provide accessible abortions. We at Reproductive and WEI conducted a nationwide survey called the Disability and Abortion Access Survey, and we have an upcoming publication publishing those results, which is really exciting. It will be sharing these findings of experiences that people shared in the survey about ways that their abortion experience was made accessible or suggestions of what could have been better for their experience, and provides recommendations for reproductive justice advocates and abortion professionals, including medical providers, abortion doulas, and abortion funds on how to make their practices more accessible to people with disabilities. We received 32 responses from people across the country of a wide range of disabilities, and we're really thankful for the people that took the time to share their stories and their experiences with us, and being able to use those to highlight and advocate for change. Next slide. Some of the key response themes that we received from people were about the importance of accessing abortion care. And those responses mainly fell into two categories of people who really valued the access to abortion care to protect their autonomy, which, as people with disabilities know, that there's a very long history of government interference in being able to exercise our rights and ability to make our own decisions. And the second category was lack of desire or resources to have a child, which plays into the higher rates of poverty and unemployment for people with disabilities. Next, we heard about reproductive coercion that people experience, being pressured by outside forces, either to continue their pregnancy or to end their pregnancy. We also heard about negative interactions with the healthcare system, like provider bias, and systematic barriers to care, like cost barriers, travel barriers, and programmatic barriers to care. And those included things like communication, misinformation, and physical barriers. Health risks associated with pregnancy that included things like mental health risks and physical health risks, as well as positive experiences that people had with healthcare systems and ways that their abortion experience was empowering and positive for them. So when talking about those themes, we used those to come up with some key practice recommendations. And here's a list here. I am not going to give all of the recommendations that we gave for each of these categories because we would be here for a lot longer. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of the practical tips that we heard based off of the responses that we got. And that included things like providing clear information about what the abortion process is going to be like for clients once they start the initial intake, including ways that you can provide accommodations, and trying to maintain the same point of contact for a disabled person through the entire process. And if you can connect someone with their abortion doula or navigator or volunteer ahead of the appointment, that can be particularly helpful so that people know what's happening going into their appointment and can be prepared, and also don't have to continuously try to re-explain information to people or adjust their communication styles. And providing information about accommodations and accessible services on your website in a way that is plain language and clear, and an accessible website generally. And being able to screen patients or clients for disabilities while doing initial intake and have that information follow the patient through their whole experience so that, again, they don't have to repeat the same information to people. And training staff on how to work with clients with disabilities, support their decision-making capacity, and start from a place of assuming that they have decision-making capacity and that they are the experts in their own bodies. So We also covered a couple of key advocacy recommendations. Which are on the next slide, and these can be advocacy recommendations for both providers, and people with disabilities. We can go to the next slide, yeah. To highlight some of these, especially on, advocating for expanded access to community-based services that connect people with disabilities to supports, work, and a living wage. Supporting the end of forced sterilization so that people are able to make full and complete decisions about their lives and their bodies. Highlighting the dangers of abortion bans for disabled people. Communication campaigns are critical for spreading information about abortion access, but those campaigns need to include disabled voices and the stories of disabled people. And another key point is promoting research and data collection on access to reproductive health care for disabled people. I think we're all very aware that there is a significant gap in research and data around disability, and being able to collect information that is disaggregated so that you can actually pull meaningful information to advocate for policy. It's very difficult to advocate for change when we don't have the data and studies to back it up. So on the last slide, I'll just end, to the next slide, please. With inviting you all to sign up with this QR code if you're interested in receiving a copy of the, survey report when it's released. It's with our graphic designers right now. They're doing all their hard work to make it a beautiful and accessible document. So we would love for you to sign up with this QR code and provide your email so that we can email you a copy of it when it's released. And then I will turn it over to our other lovely panelists. Thank you so much.
I am excited to read that. So hi, I'm Colleen. Katie introduced me. I'm the MAP manager at Ohio Women's Alliance, and I'll get into what that means in a second. We can go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Visual description. I'm a white woman with like shortish brown hair. I'm wearing a pink shirt that has a description of what reproductive justice is on it. First, just want to say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an academic. So if you want that, there are a lot of people here at this conference who can give that to you. I have a BA in English and I dropped out of grad school. So I'm just setting the stage here that what I know in these areas is just from work or because I'm a nerd. So if I get something wrong about the law or something academic, just don't worry about it. I got my start in abortion work over 10 years ago at Preterm, which is an independent clinic here in Cleveland. If you don't know what an independent clinic is, that basically means it's not a Planned Parenthood. Independent clinics provide the majority of abortion care in this country, especially almost all later abortion care. So just a good thing to keep in mind about the landscape. I had a brief hiatus from that. I went to work as a paralegal at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and I was mostly doing public benefits work as part of our medical legal partnership. So I did get a lot of experience in Social Security disability, SSI, Medicaid, SNAP, and then I also dabbled in a little education law too. So I have some experience with like the IDEA, things like that. I was at Legal Aid for the early years of the pandemic, and then I went back to Preterm as the compliance manager right after SB8 and right before Dobbs. So I'm really good at picking like the most stressful time to be in a job. I was in that role through March 2023, and now I'm with Ohio Women's Alliance. OWA is a statewide reproductive justice organization that's focused on building power with and for women and gender expansive folks in Ohio. So my specific role is doing our MAP. MAP is a practical support program for abortion seekers. So while we are not an abortion fund like the Amazing Abortion Fund of Ohio, which is how I originally met Maggie, We do basically everything around it. So volunteer rides, booking travel and hotels, providing direct cash support for travel, meals, childcare, lost wages. Basically, my day-to-day is working with folks to see how we can break down the barriers they have to accessing abortion care. I call myself an abortion concierge. It's a lot of like problem solving. So we serve Ohioans who are getting care anywhere in the country and folks who come into Ohio for care. So how is that related to both repro and disability justice? I think necessary to doing practical support work is an understanding that the existing supports, like the existing system, is not enough. And that is obviously very true in disability as well. I saw this all the time when I was a paralegal, when I was working with folks, often who were receiving like government disability benefits. Dealing with the Social Security Administration, dealing with JFS is horrible, it's miserable. It's dehumanizing and it's not enough for folks. And the same is true in abortion access. What is out there is often not enough. And practical support work is also often more critical for disabled folks for a lot of the reasons that Amanda was mentioning. And then last, I'll also say I participated in union organizing efforts at both legal aid and preterm. I'm proud to say preterm was the first unionized independent abortion clinic in the United States. You're not the last though. I also serve on the board of the Northeast Ohio Worker Center here. So I'm really interested in the intersections of labor and reproductive justice. And I think it's important to keep in mind that sometimes we have this idea that disabled people and workers are mutually exclusive groups. And maybe that comes from the government, requirement that like if you're receiving, say, SSI, you are doing very little work. But really, many disabled people are workers. Many workers are disabled people or will be disabled. And a lot of people also do work that isn't necessarily categorized as work or thought of as work, especially care work. And just like you're at a particular risk for wage theft, discrimination, other abuses at work, if you're pregnant, the same is true if you have a disability. So I also see building worker power as really integral to all of these issues. So next slide. So what changed with Dobbs? You'll hear folks say a lot of the time that Roe was the floor, meaning Roe was not perfect, did not secure access for everybody. I think everybody in this room probably is well aware of that. That said, it's still really bad to have the floor go out from under you. So, a lot of barriers already existed under Roe and under Casey. But they got a lot worse. So Dobbs did not invent this crisis, but it was still very, very bad. So that day, a lot of people who, were very suddenly facing a situation in which they could not get the care they needed in the way they'd previously been able to access it. That might have already been a very difficult access process, but there were people who all of a sudden couldn't be seen by the clinic down the street from them, and that includes preterm. We in Ohio had the injunction on the heartbeat ban dissolved that very same day. And so it instantly meant having to call people, having to send them out of state. It was horrible and it still is horrible. So a lot of these existing barriers got worse. And I wanted to highlight just some of the access issues that are sometimes specific to folks with disabilities and how the stresses on those got a lot worse after Dobbs. So Amanda mentioned issues of physical access. Many clinics and other healthcare settings already aren't set up to respond well to physical access needs. An example, when I was at preterm, fairly accessible building, but it's multiple floors. It has an elevator. And guess what breaks down a lot? The elevator. And guess what the clinic doesn't have money to fix because it's really hard to keep an abortion clinic open. It was hard enough just to stay open in general. The elevator costs money to fix. To fully replace it would cost, I think, over $1 million. So that's not happening. There is no money coming in that's going to cover that. And I'll get into some of the issues with philanthropy later, but like that's an example, I think, of how, you know, even sometimes when a healthcare provider is aware of their access issues and wants to resolve them, there are often a lot of barriers to doing that, and the difficulties of operating and sustaining an abortion clinic. It's already very challenging. There may also be issues with language and interpretation. So, you know, if you need sign language interpretation at the clinic, some clinics are not well equipped to provide interpretation. You know, either to folks with hearing loss or folks who, you know, speak English as a second language or have limited English proficiency. So that's often an issue at a lot of places. Again, if you have like a substance use or addiction, there can often be difficulty with like getting appropriate pain medication, for example. If you're living in sober living, I've worked with clients who have been in like sober living facilities, and it is a nightmare trying to get people checked out, checked back in, traveling, even just communicating, because they often don't have their phones. There may be criminal justice system involvement there. Similarly with like mental health issues or trauma, you may have, you know, not being able to get a pregnancy termination can worsen existing issues. You may have faced the fact that some mental health practitioners, just like a lot of doctors, are anti-abortion. You may also face pressure to terminate your pregnancy due to your mental health, or pressure to continue your pregnancy because of stigma that says that abortion is going to make you depressed. There's also the issue of outpatient versus inpatient care. So most abortion care happens outpatient. It happens at clinics, often these independent clinics and Planned Parenthoods. But if you have certain health issues, you may actually require inpatient care. You may not be able to be seen safely in an outpatient setting. And that's also very, very challenging to access, especially now that there are so many hospitals that are not being very accessible to people who need care, and who are unwilling to provide abortion care, even if they're perfectly capable of doing it. And then there's also indicators for parental and fetal health. And this one can be very complicated, because I think there are folks who have faced pressure to terminate a pregnancy because of their own health concerns or their own disabilities, or due to genetic or developmental issues with their pregnancy. There can be pressure to terminate that pregnancy. Or if you are a disabled parent, the possibility that like your child could be taken away from you. On the other hand, not great to be forced to continue a pregnancy if you yourself have significant health issues. Amanda also touched on this. You know, this can worsen existing health issues. Pregnancy itself can be a disabling condition. And then also being forced to continue a pregnancy that has significant fetal abnormalities due to the lack of abortion care. That can have severe negative mental health effects. It can cause trauma for the parent or parents. And it may mean that they're giving birth to a child who is going to have a short and miserable life. So I think like that is also something that is very critical when we talk about what it means for people to have full and thriving lives, and how that intersects like with abortion care. And then finally, also abortion workers. I've been talking about workers' rights a little bit. Abortion workers, like any workers in the United States, have limited rights and protections. If they unionize, they can make it a little better, but the current, you know, state of labor in this country is very bad, and it makes it really hard to work in a field that is so often in crisis and so underfunded, and it can be debilitating to your own physical and mental health when you work in this field. Dobbs summer, I always say, was like a very hard summer. I like, as someone who lives with mental illness, it was not great for me and for my coworkers and friends. And so that's also something that's really critical to consider. If you're going to a clinic for care, who's seeing you? Is it someone who's exhausted and burnt out because there's no support? So that also I think is something that's critical to think about. So currently in Ohio, we're kind of in an interesting place. We did pass the Reproductive Freedom Amendment in November 2023, which is great. At the same time, the Reproductive Freedom Amendment did not wave a magic wand and solve these problems. So there are legal challenges to the state's abortion laws that are ongoing. We've had some success. For example, the 24-hour waiting period is currently blocked. That created enormous barriers for folks, especially if you have to travel, find childcare, take off work. Now a lot of people can be seen in one appointment instead of having two, which is fantastic. But this is still Ohio. Ohio has been very hostile to abortion for a long time. The state is continuing to defend a lot of these anti-abortion laws that I think most of us would look at and say, well, that's clearly against the, what we wanted in the Reproductive Freedom Amendment. So, I think this is that amendment, Roe, the ADA, other laws, we have to keep in mind that legality is not the same as access and is not the same as justice. We can do a lot with law and policy, but especially now it's the floor. We have to do a lot more than that. So what comes next? So there's some threats and some lessons. So important to keep in mind, I think is that this is not new. Dobbs and the current presidential administration and everything they're doing, this is the culmination of a decades-long conservative legal and social project. And to be able to meet the moment we're in, we have to recognize that and recognize often our own complicity as members of institutions, universities, healthcare, law. And we really have to name that this is a white supremacist project and be very clear that all of these things are because they are trying to build a world in which anyone who can be pregnant, anyone who is disabled, anyone who is poor or a person of color is, meaningless or can be discarded. So, things that we're looking at right now, we have the destruction of this already insufficient social safety net. I mentioned, getting Social Security disability or SSI is often simply not enough. But if that's all you have and it still gets taken away from you, that's still terrible. We're staring down the barrel of that right now. There's this idea that bodies belong to others and belong to the state in particular. We see this with abortion bans, but we also see this with attacks on trans healthcare and trans youth. For example, one of their big talking points is about, oh, these trans kids are going to lose their fertility. And that just emphasizes that there's this state interest in people being able to bear children or not. We have the erosion of all these foundations that are built by things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, IDEA, National Labor Relations Act, ACA. Again, these are not perfect things. These institutions, these precedents are themselves harmful at times and often insufficient. But if we erase those foundations, we have even less to stand on. And then one of my favorite things to talk about, and then I'm going a little bit over, so I'm going to stop, but is that there has been a lot of institutional abandonment and institutions complying in advance. Case is not exempt from this. So just to say that. So Amanda mentioned there have been articles, for example, from ProPublica about cases in which people have lost their lives or suffered a lot because they've received delayed care and safe abortion bans. Yes, abortion laws are to blame here, but we also need to talk about how larger institutions like these hospitals need to be willing to provide life-saving care and defend that in court. Instead, what you have is hospital legal counsel saying, ooh, I don't know, we're going to be as risk averse as possible, and we're going to make people suffer. And as we've seen, people have suffered and people have lost their lives. So I think while we need to recognize that institutions and the law won't save us and we have to care for each other outside of these existing structures, we also need to demand that they're doing their job. So, you know, I think it's important for people in power, and that's politicians, it's university presidents, it's hospital administrators, need to actually step up and meet this moment. Like this is it, this is the crisis, this is the rainy day. So that's why I say on there, don't be chicken. You have to be willing to stand up for caring for people, standing up for what is right, even if you face blowback. You know, and we've seen a lot of examples of this case. Many other universities went and closed their DEI centers because of an executive order that should not actually be that powerful. We've seen, you know, that hospital at NYU that's stopped doing appointments for trans youth healthcare. This is a problem. These institutions are complying in advance. They are doing the work of the fascists for them. And so we need to demand more. And if we're in positions where we can do that, where we have power in the institutions we're within, we need to say that. And I think this is very much encapsulated by the refusal of people in power to speak out on Palestine. Gaza is now home to the largest number of child amputees in the world. You know, if you're going to talk about the intersection of disability and repro justice, you need to be able to name that. And refusal to do so means that you are not equipped to meet this moment for anyone. So if you have power, now is the time to use it. And we cannot sacrifice any group of people, whether that's trans people, disabled people, people who can get pregnant. We can't sacrifice them to fascism. So I've gone over, but thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, hi. Good morning. My name is Shakira Underdown, and for a visual description, I am a petite and height Black woman with a pretty bright orange turban and a contrasting Black blouse. It is lovely to see all of you here in this room and online. I don't know which camera, but hello. I just have some remarks. The Dobbs decision opened the door for more biased, unjust, and fatal control of our bodies. The ruling provided the catalyst for states to regress back to an era of sanctioned regulations of the undesirable, individuals deemed unfit for public health, LGBTQIA, BIPOC, individuals with disabilities, and more. For years, we have fought tirelessly against harm echoed by rhetoric like the medical and moral models of disability for a hope to survive in the margins. Our right to live full lives came with conditions, our autonomy with an asterisk. For we know all too well the restrictions that mute our voices for validation as the discriminatory noose tightens around our necks. We are prevented from accessing crucial knowledge to inform decisions about our own lives and regularly battle barriers of bias and ignorance enshrined in institutions such as medicine, education, housing, and transportation. To learn us, to validate us, to include us, it's not mainstream scholarship, but instead it's the arcane. It's sought out by those who wish to be stewards of progress instead of taught to all as required knowledge for practitioners. Our story is one of struggled success, and the far-reaching impact of Dobbs has only increased the burden against us and underscored the hard truth that our right to bodily autonomy is not guaranteed by the Constitution. Make no mistake, I am not being glib when I posit such an assertion because I am well aware of Dobbs's holding. But by removing the federal right to an abortion, leaving such decision to the states, the Supreme Court has authored anti-canon that provides a carte blanche
for the continued removal of rights and protections necessary to support equitable quality of life, liberty, and property. State jurisdictions waited with bated breath, eager to enact trigger laws furthering restricting gestational limits of abortions, dismantling funding for abortion health care, and or banning abortion care altogether. Criminal penalties accompanying violations of these laws caused panic and fear that was not limited to abortions. Medical practitioners fled from practicing reproductive health care, and students of medicine shrank away from pursuing the specialization. As such, healthcare deserts emerged, upending the already fragile ecosystem that is reproductive healthcare and endangering countless lives. Abortion clinics, contrary to what some may believe, are not sites of evil hell-bent on disregarding life. In fact, removing access to these locations is the antithesis of pro-life, because with them went medical practitioners, checkups, sexual and reproductive health education, disease intervention and prevention, access to medication, and more. Abortion healthcare is part of reproductive healthcare, and Dobbs did not hold in the interests of justice or life. If anything, the decision demarcated the line between the haves and the have-nots. The decision halted abortion clinic appointments, leaving many without life-saving care or safe options. Choices and control revoked, thousands were thrown into limbo, and abortion care became an option slated for the more affluent, the able, and the normal. You see, it's no easy feat to pay for an abortion. I know, because I helped a friend raise funds for theirs. We hustled quickly to gather the cash, racing against time to make an appointment with the only clinic in the area willing to perform the procedure after 8 weeks. That was before Dobbs. After Dobbs, the cost of obtaining an abortion includes in a growing number of jurisdictions travel to a clinic, which may be a flight to another state, somewhere to stay, which needs to be safe for aftercare, medication at full price, and much more. Note that's financial cost. It's not taking into account the mental and emotional cost of the trauma of undergoing a procedure in an unfamiliar place, feeling unprotected from potential attacks like jeers, unsolicited comments and approaches, invasive attempts to block access to your care, and the pressure of needing to fall within the ever-shrinking legal safe window. It almost seems a miracle should the conditions align and you are able to emerge relatively unscathed. You are able to return home safe and sound with no fear of reprisal. You still have your job after needing to call in sick for several days, and your finances are not in jeopardy. But what of those who live in the margins? Those for whom a cisgender, able, heteronormative, white society is already a daily obstacle. For us, more questions arise, and the chances of obtaining abortion care lessen. Will the practitioner provide culturally relevant care? Will the location be accessible? Will my choices not only be heard, but honored? Or shall I be a puppet instead of a patient? These are the questions that some of us have asked ourselves on a regular basis, not just when seeking abortion care. The states are inconsistent with their responses, and many of us have had to make concessions of our autonomy in exchange for life-saving or life-supporting care. Control of ourselves has never been a constant for marginalized bodies, and Dobbs has given more control to the states, not to the individuals seeking care. Signing the decision in our blood. Once again, mortality rates have skyrocketed, with Black and disabled bodies, individuals already at a higher risk for complications and maladies related to reproductive health, paying the price. Culturally competent and accessible care remain elusive at best, requiring longer wait times to be seen by a provider, or even relocation to areas where such care is available. And when this is not possible, more lives are lost. Add to this the spectrum of restrictive abortion care bans and the choice to even make a life-saving decision is terminated. Do I appear callous toward life because I find Dobbs a hastily thought, uneducated, and violent decision? Ignorance would say yes. But that is because the voices that wish to exert further control on my body and make me consider whether I reside in a quasi-sanctuary jurisdiction before even considering procreation do not care to understand the impact of their decisions. These regulations were not enacted in support of unborn life, but in pursuit of power. The Dobbs decision affirms this, and the concurrences double down on the true insidious intent behind the ruling. Dismantling the right to control our own bodies will extend past abortion bans. The current presidential administration has already taken actions that evidence as such. Removing diversity, equity, inclusion, and access to the full history of our nation and its people. Blocking the right to housing free of discrimination for trans individuals. Shutting down access to life-saving knowledge about disease and its prevention. And attempting to impose criminal sanctions against those who dare to fight back and remind us all that the Constitution still exists. Removing choice ends life. So what now? I don't want to live in the margins and in the shadows. I do not wish to rely on a reproductive justice underground railroad. That people have already done that. I exist today and every day as a Black, bisexual, disabled woman, an intersectional powerhouse that is choosing to not cede further control. I am sick of being scared, angry, and small. My DNA contains the code of those who were once controlled, bodies that were beasts of burden, and lives that were controlled more freely than game pieces on a chessboard. I refuse to return to the field, though Dobbs is a harbinger in such a life. So what? How? And who? The answer to all of those questions is you. I speak these words both as a personal assessment of Dobbs and how it can affect our world and how it has affected our world, and also as a call to action. We have been here before. We have many times, and we prevailed. Our battleground may differ, but our weapons remain the same. You, the people. It is the people who elected those who have signed anti-abortion legislation, those who have authorized judicial appointments, and those who have made the appointing. These elected officials are not representatives of our needs, our rights, or our desires. Polling shows that actually the majority of Americans support abortion rights. Thus, to take back our bodies, we must renovate the governing bodies. I urge you to vote at all levels and at all elections. It is not the big ones, the big show, but all that count. Reproductive justice will continue to be a dream deferred and a refrain at protests and conferences if we do not vote from the ground up. Further, run for office, draft legislation, share knowledge, facts, data. Dare to disrupt and take back your power. If you do not know who is running, ask me. If you don't like who's running, join the race or find someone who can. From bond issues to Black Lives Matter and more, change the landscape. This is more than possible. It happened. The unprecedented happened twice, and it's been shit. Do not endeavor to rewrite history, to revise it, but reject it. Dobbs did. I will close with this. Once more, I find myself within the halls of a law school. I'm not taking the exam, so I'm fine. I'm not being cold called either. These are sacred spaces to me. For here, minds are molded and shaped to inherit a knowledge so powerful that it can change civilizations. I am eternally grateful to speak before you as an attorney, but I humbly admit to you that I considered quitting and dropping out of law school. When he was first elected, defeating Hillary Clinton, I saw racist, sexist, and ableist revelry abound on my university's campus. That day I fled the law school, fled to the law school rather, desperate for the wisdom of my sage professors, these legal demigods who would tell me how to fix it. And as I pushed open the college's doors, I found them crying. It was at that moment that I fled outside, tear-stricken and grasping for air. Air that I thought would never be mine to breathe again without fear. I looked around at these Proud Boys, posting their shirts, their chants, and their weapons. While I grasped my textbook and my highlighters until my knuckles paled, I watched one of them walk behind a young woman wearing a hijab. For those of you that do not know what a hijab is, it is a covering worn about the head by women of the Islamic faith. It is a choice that they have in most places to elect to wear this covering or not. He tugged at the fabric and yanked it off of her, throwing it to the ground as he shouted that this was America. And he took away for a moment her right to control her body. And the assault was met with cheers. Incensed, I thought, I want to sue his ass. I want to get him charged and convicted. And it was at that moment that I remembered that I was still standing next to the doors of an institution that would permit me the path to do just that. I returned to class. I graduated. I passed the bar, and I continued to fight for individuals like her, like me, like us. I cannot, though, do this alone. I need you. I need you in this room. I need you on the live stream, on this panel. We need you. So in Baptist churches, in Black Baptist churches, you are taught a lesson of the power of call and response. I am never one to gatekeep knowledge, so here is your lesson. I want you to look at your neighbor. If you are watching this online, look at yourself. Repeat after me. Neighbor, I know you are powerful. I know you are fighting. I see you. But neighbor, we gonna need to call somebody. Educate somebody. Take somebody with us. Cause we outside. We in these streets. And we're taking it to the polls. All of them. We will vote. We will run. We will write. Because true reproductive justice is our right. Amen.
Thank you so much. We have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to raise your hand and I will come run the mic to you. I might run slowly because I am me, but I will come.
Hi, Hi, good morning. Thank you all so much. My name is Chandra. I am here from preterm and yay, we love preterm. And Colleen, it's so like fun to see you in person. So I'm hard of hearing. And thank you for providing interpreters. And one thing that we see in the deaf community is the kind of discussion of like understanding the history of eugenics in this country with people with disabilities. A lot of people don't know, but Alexander Graham Bell, who was like public enemy #1 of deaf people, but he supported laws, and there were laws that would prevent deaf people from marrying each other because they wanted to make sure that deaf people wouldn't create more deaf babies. And you know, and then that's true in other like reproductive, no, or like other communities. There's a long history of, you know, actually the Nazi Party came to the United States to learn about eugenics from us. The first people targeted in the Holocaust were disabled people, right? So there's obviously a long history of eugenics with people with disabilities. And one thing that I see a lot of discussion about in the disability community and also in the deaf community is, you know, basically selective eugenics of like fetuses who deaf fetuses or not deaf zygotes, you know, however you want to say. And also genetic being able to select the certain traits in a baby and concerns about that. Obviously, very pro-abortion, but I think that there also is this kind of tension, and even in Ohio, we have laws that you can't do an abortion if you know that the baby or the pregnancy had the genetic markers of Down syndrome. Obviously, so I think there can be a tension between reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, and also how do we stop the enforcement of eugenics for people with disabilities. And I think that within the disability community, there's a lot of disagreement about how to handle that. And so I'm really curious, you know, I know you talked a little bit about the history of forced sterilization and like the barriers that come up for people with disabilities and around that. But I'm just, you know, I've always kind of struggled with that a little bit. And I'm curious what you guys have seen, heard, what you think, etc.
Sure, I can start. This is Amanda speaking. Thank you so much for your question, because I think it is one that has historically caused a lot of tension between the disability movement and the reproductive justice movement. And it continues to cause a wedge as there's been rhetoric used in the past by reproductive rights people who use eugenic language when talking about promoting a pro-choice stance. At WEI, we're a global organization, so in 2020 pre-pandemic, so January of 2020, we did a large size focus group of disabled women and trans and non-binary people across the world on their opinions about messaging around this. You can find that report on our website. But something that we came up with was people really overwhelmingly want to emphasize their bodily autonomy and their choices when we're talking about disability and eugenic type practices. Having the ability to make choices about your body as a disabled person is so integral. And that includes things like abortion. And for people who are concerned about eugenic type language, obviously using eugenics to justify abortion access is unacceptable. But also talking about the reasons that individual people might feel like it's not safe for them to raise a disabled child in a society that is so ableist is a way that we have tried to highlight that people need choices. This is also just a personal opinion, but a personal opinion about whether or not individuals create eugenics or whether that's like a societal policy is eugenics. An individual choice about what they're doing with their body may come from biases and prejudice and ableism. But is that eugenics if they don't have the ability to force other people to make the same choice?
Yeah, I agree. I'll just add a couple of things to that. I think starting from the tenets of reproductive justice, so the right to have a child, to not have a child, to raise your child in a healthy and safe environment, and bodily autonomy. You know, like, yes, there are going to be people who make decisions about their reproduction that are based in, stigma, in eugenics. And I think on one hand, a hard truth we have to hold is that if I stand for someone's right to have an abortion, I stand for that right, even if I might not make that same decision. Or maybe if I even think that decision is weird and amoral for some reason. Ultimately, that is their body, and I have to, maintain their right to make that decision. But I also think it's important to talk about increasing supports for disabled children and their parents. As an example, I counseled someone when I was working at preterm. This was before the ban on providing care if you knew that there was a diagnosis of Down syndrome. And the patient I was talking to said, I thought about continuing this pregnancy, but then I found out that it has Down syndrome, and she had already been parenting a disabled child. She had a daughter who was, I think, a toddler with like a severe heart condition. And so she knew what it took to parent a disabled child. And she said, I already am so overwhelmed. I'm already struggling with a real lack of support here, that knowing what I know, I can't bring this other child into the world. So I think like that increasing supports is going to make it more possible for people to not have to make those decisions. And then also we should talk briefly about like the anti-abortion, white supremacist, fascist movement. They say they want people to have more babies, but what they want is desirable babies. They want white babies, they want able-bodied babies, or they want, if they're talking about disability, they are often focusing on things like Down syndrome because it is seen as, a better disability. It's, they think of it as being somehow like desirable, and that the parents are angels and martyrs or whatever. And they're not really grappling with some of the implications of forcing people to continue pregnancies that might result in a child with a very difficult life, because again, these same people are not providing any support for them.
I also just have one more thing to add before we go to you. I also just feel like we need to say, because I think everybody here said it, like, they are out for all of us, so playing into their rhetoric to divide us is a waste of all of our energy. Like, no activist can say everything perfectly every single time that they speak. I wish that was possible for all of us, but it is not. So if you could take learnings from one movement of them saying, hey, don't use this kind of language, and then move on, and that same movement can be like, okay, we've told them how to do better, they're trying to do better. We have bigger problems of like than policing other people's language if they're trying to do better. Obviously, like causing harm within intersectional movements is not acceptable, but like if we're all trying to do better, like we can't let them play into dividing us.
I agree. I think that what is salient right here that we're trying to echo is that the idea of reproductive justice, the ideal reproductive justice, and the reality that we want to see is one where that choice can be made free from a stigma that is articulated through the legal system or through the medical system, the education system. You are going to pass laws, change landscapes, and people will still think something about you, okay? I mean, that's true. Like, Brown v. Board of Education allows me to be in this room with you. And there are those who have to respect it, but they will still spit in my face for being here. For many, my presence is a crime and will remain so. But It is about respecting my choice and how I wish to control my body, and the same in the hypothetical that you put before us. Even if I do not like the reasoning, I still want the protections in place because that was your reason, that's your choice, that is your body there to be able to do that. I think that in order to support it, we do need to take a lot of the power out of those who are not educated and not willing to educate themselves on the realities. Put the doctors, the nurses who are actually in the trenches doing the work, put them up, have them present data, allow them to have their voices at the forefront. Don't get me wrong, I love attorneys, but sometimes we need to sit down. Because many times our arguments that we are putting forth are not actually representative of the clients, the patients that these institutions are serving. And so then a mixed message comes through, a diluted message. I will also say that I worked at actually the same PNA where Maggie worked. And as a disability rights staff attorney, I did not get to pick and choose who I supported. And I had a racist client who only tolerated me because we never met in person. And he thought I spoke like a white girl, so he never knew that the code switching was there. But I worked diligently, no matter how many N-words he threw around like he was sprinkling salt on a salad. I still worked to protect him and his right to access, because that is the job that I came here to do. Your current representatives are engaging broadly in dereliction of duty. Understand that if you want that to change, you need to change them.
So thank you, everyone. We have run a little over, so we're gonna get ready for the next panel, but thank you, everyone. This has been really informative.